It's true, though. It's all true, right? Everything they say is true.
No, that was
Bob Stevens. James
Martinson.
Bergstein.
And
Billy
Wait, no,
Wilkerson.
Don't say that one. The list goes on.
And the list goes on. Thank you.
We actually wanted to use that clip from, because one of the people who did that was Carmelo Anthony. He's like, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and the list goes on. John Oliver did it too. I can't remember which clips we wound up using for that little segment. You'll see it here though. This is
all right.
Let's solve racism together from the Wonderful World of Stu. Welcome to the Wonderful World of Stu, part 2 of our 2-part series, Races, Race History in America. The media has worked very, very hard, very consistently, over a very long period of time, to make you believe that white people really are not fond of black people.
When it comes down to enforcement, they feel that, and people feel like it's still a slave patrol. People parade around in tanks.
At a certain point, the burden is too great on the black community, and everyone, the white community, has to stand up and say enough and deal with their brutal history and their brutal system in which people are operating.
I see a guy selling CDs, and he's killed. I see a guy selling loose-leaf cigarettes, and he's killed. See, that's what gets us up in arms.
I should.
The reality is that white Americans have created the conditions that require a phrase like Black Lives Matter. Do you know what I would give to live in a world where I didn't have to say Black Lives Matter?
And as you may be aware, there was a time in our history in which that was true to an embarrassingly large extent. And guess what? I had nothing to do with that one. That wasn't me. If I had relatives a zillion years ago that did, that's a problem. But I'm not going to apologize for them because I'm not them. They get to be responsible for what they did. I'll be responsible for what I have done. But so many people are convinced that there is a pandemic of white-on-black violence in this country. And we are forced to set the record straight, Colin Kaepernick and every other person that's been in the news. Before we begin, let me tell you that we are going back into the creepy sort of back corner of the boiler room in the dark. I am forcing myself into the talk show host horror movie here. Simply talking about this topic in public is like having a sleepover party with Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and Freddy Krueger, all of them white, by the way. So, to avoid what little career I have being sliced into pieces by razor fingers, I will try to be as precise as possible. Everything we're about to go through comes directly out of the expanded homicide data spreadsheet from the FBI's 2014 Uniform Crime Reporting, with supplemental information from the U.S. Census. Get ready. The accusation from the media, Black Lives Matter, and the left is that white people are targeting black people in extraordinary numbers because of racism or something like that. The data tells us that this is not true. From the FBI, blacks are 13% of the population and commit 47% of murders. Whites are responsible for almost the same percentage of murders, 48%, but there are a lot more white people. They make up 77% of the population. Of course, white people do kill black people. Whites murdered 187 black people in 2014. However, black people killed 446 white people. In other words, blacks killed 138% more whites than the other way around, despite being outnumbered by whites almost 6 to 1. When it comes to blacks being killed, the sad but true fact is that black people murdered 12 times as many blacks as white people did. So let's look at what all of this means. What does it prove? Well, there is nothing, zero, to support an ongoing systemic racial slaughter of blacks by whites. Yes, there are horrible incidents that get tons of publicity. We live in a freaking country where David Duke is still involved in politics and seemingly tweeting all the time. We are far from perfect. But there is absolutely nothing that shows that violent racism is systematic in this country in any way, shape, or form. But there's more. What this data does not prove is David Duke's fantasy, that any piece of these elevated crime rates we just talked about are caused by skin color. There is no evidence that points to some systemic wave of violence against whites either. So how do you explain the elevated rates? Well, it's not guns. White homes are more than twice as likely to own guns. The issue isn't a race problem or a gun problem. Why is black-on-black crime such an issue? Follow along. People tend to live near people who are similar to them. People tend to kill people who live near them. About 7 in 10 blacks live in cities. About 8 in 10 whites do not. Cities are more violent. Blacks live in cities more often, and blacks live around other blacks. There are long-term progressive policies that have guaranteed that this situation is the reality and may never change until those policies are reversed. But stunningly, murder is not typically caused by appearance. This is an oversimplification, of course. You can read endless studies on this topic to try and parse the details, but you can boil it down pretty easily by realizing this. Yes, the person who says this is crazy.
They look bad, they sound bad, and usually they smell bad. 73% of the abortions in this country are nigger control. We need that.
But so is the person who says this.
It's open season on killing white people and cops. It's unavoidable, inescapable.
They're both freaking nuts. A reminder to the media, when you only call one of them out, you're doing it wrong. So, to review, whites are not hunting blacks. This is good. Blacks are not hunting whites. This is also good. Crime rates are dropping, and the only people who are trying to change that are the race-baiting activists who make their living off the tension. Well, with that and the actual murder. Despite the fact that I have been quoting FBI spreadsheets for the past few minutes, I anxiously await the Freddy Krueger glove to the back from the horror movie that is The Media.